Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nick and Laura. On today's episode, Laura and I discuss tips for working while traveling. We talk to Justin Taberham about career curves, environmental policy in the UK, and working on global environmental careers. And finally, if you have 2 legs, you have more legs than the average human.
What?
This is a brain teaser because not everybody has 2 legs, so automatically the average is lower. So if you have 2 legs, you're higher than the average.
Oh my gosh, that messes with my brain.
Nerdy. That's super nerdy, right? I don't know.
That's like science dad joke.
Yeah. It's actually a dad fact. That's what that is. That's a dad fact. No, not a dad joke. My work here is done. Hit that music.
All right. After 2 years of taking the conference virtual, the NAEP Conference Committee and the Florida Association of Environmental Professionals are excited to welcome you to the Westin Fort Lauderdale Beach Resort in Florida, May 16th through 19th, 2022. You can check it out at www.naep.org. And we appreciate all of our sponsors, and they are what keep this show going. So if you'd like to sponsor the show, please head on over to www.environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out the sponsor form for details. Get to our segment.
So we talked to Justin today. His interview is coming up, and he was in the UK, and so we were talking across 10 or 11 time zones during the interview. That was pretty wild.
That's so cool. Yeah, it was. Yeah. I'm just getting up before breakfast, and he's probably got off and had dinner.
Yeah, he had dinner. I'd had lunch. It was so funny.
Yeah.
that we work, but it's one of those things. It's like the awe of technology that we have. That we are able to do that is just mind-boggling.
Yeah. So I guess we should say, I think we think our listeners are mind readers. I'm in Hawaii.
Yeah, she's in Hawaii.
I'm in Hawaii, and Justin's. Well, when we talk to him, he'll be in London.
Yep.
And
I'm stuck at home.
Nick.
Yeah, in North Carolina. Just hanging out in cold weather that I'm not used to. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everyone feel bad for me.
Yeah. So Nick, I wanted to ask you about, I am here in Hawaii, and I'm here on a business trip. A friend of mine and I are talking about a company that I've been working on and bringing her in to work with me on it. Mm-hmm. And, we were like, oh, we could meet in Syracuse or we can meet in Denver. And they're like, how about we just meet in Hawaii instead,
Yeah, absolutely.
And seemed to be a good choice since that winter storm came the day I left, and it was zero.
It really did.
It was literally 0 degrees when I got on the plane in Syracuse. I was like, this is perfect timing.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Right? So long, suckers.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, but this is what I want to do. I want nothing more than to be able to work and travel.
Yeah.
And I know that you work and travel, but it's kind of a little bit different as a entrepreneur, and I'm booking my own travel and I have to discipline my own time. And I know that you travel for work, so someone else is probably setting up your flight times and stuff maybe, but you have meeting times and like work hours. Like I'm here trying to go, okay, let's get some work in before we head over to the volcano, and I'll work at midnight if I have to. But I wanted to know, so a lot of people who are listening travel a lot for work or maybe want to, but what do you find is most helpful for you to get your work done when you're in some place like Hawaii or any other cool places you've been?
Well, I think you have to accept that if you're going to a beautiful place, you're gonna enjoy it, right? You have to accept it. I know. As shocking as that is, it's going to be hard. In some ways, I guess it depends, right? Sometimes people ask you, what was it like? I'm like, well, I don't know. I went to my hotel, I went to an office meeting, and I went back to my hotel and then the airport, right? And in some ways, that's just the nature of it, right? And for me personally, I like to have at least one opportunity to experience where I am. And usually you can do that for dinner, right? No matter what, you need to eat, and you should find a place that is kind of like the flavor of the area. What is it good at? What it'll be like? And it doesn't mean like when you go to Texas, you have to eat Mexican food. It just means when you go to Texas, go to a restaurant that's local. Do something like that. For me, that's very important. But like when you're doing business travel, you know that you have work that needs to get done and it's going to eat into your time. If you're traveling during the day, and, you know, we've talked about travel tips in general, it's better to fly in the morning because those flights don't get canceled, right? Generally, they don't get canceled. So the later you fly, the more likely you are to get a delay. But it also means that you're flying during business hours, right? And it's easy to say, oh, I'll definitely work on the plane. But you don't even know. Like maybe, you know, I've had experiences where there's a baby next to me kicking me the whole time. And, you know, like, what do I say to this baby?
Yep.
I can't be like, hey, baby, I'm trying to work. So if you could be less of a baby, that would be great. You know, it doesn't work. So you have to understand that you're probably going to spend some late nights, you know, and working in your hotel room. In some ways, if you're going to a place where you don't know anyone, it's easy. You're like, I'll just put on a sports something or other and then just type away, right? And you can make up that time. When you're going to a beautiful place like Hawaii, it's a little harder. And you kind of have to force yourself to say, okay, I'm working these hours.
Oh my God. It's so funny that you said that because like the place I'm at now is this little working farm. My little place is settled in between like the cistern and a greenhouse. And, you know, it's just like, it's not like farming you picture with like open fields, you know, it's all very condensed. There's some permaculture here and stuff. And it's just really magical. But the owners are just so full of knowledge, and you go in the house and you're in there for an hour talking about everything. We've talked about everything from like Buddhism to like the end of the world, to, you know, permaculture. We're talking, you know, and so I'm like, oh, but the whole time I'm like, okay, I guess there goes that hour for work. You know? Like,
But you have to,
I wouldn't trade it, you know?
No. Yeah. And you know, you got to accept it. Sometimes that's going to happen and you have to have a plan in place. And maybe that means you work a little bit ahead of time, which is, I always like to do better because it's like doing your homework on Friday instead of Sunday night. You know what I mean? Like it's the same kind of thing. You probably should prep up a little bit before you go because you don't want to get there and be like, this is awesome. I don't do those reports, you know, someone else, I'm sure will handle it, you know? Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is just recognizing that everything is going to take you 3 times longer.
Right. Yeah, it will. You know,
and you have to be able to adjust on the fly too. Because like, even for this podcast, we're recording later than usual because this farm is off the grid and they shut off the electricity between 10 o'clock and 7 in the morning. So that means no Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is gone because the Wi-Fi is gone because there's no electricity. And those are things you don't think of. You look at the listing and you're like, oh, it says they have Wi-Fi. I'll be good.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
And then you get there and either it doesn't work. I mean, thankfully it works really well when it is on here.
Yeah.
But it may not, you know, and then you have to go to plan B.
Right. And gosh, speaking of bad Wi-Fi, we didn't even mention that on cruises. Good luck with that. They do not have good Wi-Fi on cruises. So definitely a different experience for me. I thought for sure I'd get stuff done on a cruise. I'm like, they
don't have good Wi-Fi on the cruise. Well, they don't want you working. They want you out doing stuff. So you know, that may be intentional.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
They also do not have good Wi-Fi in RV parks. Any of them, anywhere, because I've been to them all. And they do not have, national parks still do not even have cell service, most of them. So you will not be answering messages. Or when I went 2020 on the road trip and we did several national parks, I would be having a conversation with people who are working with me and, you know, could you do this, that, and the other thing? I'm like, oh, I can't send it. You know, like we're too close to the park.
Right. Oh, I know. Gosh, I'm sure you and I have both had that experience where you're just running around with your phone looking for 2 bars. I'm like, I have one, but that's not good enough.
Yeah.
You know?
I just have to answer this person and tell them where this thing is.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like one of those things where like you really should disconnect sometimes, you know, you really should. You should take the time to do that. It's just hard. We have that like anxiety pre-built into these phones. You know, it's like, I have to know what's going on.
Here's your new iPhone. It comes with 90% of anxiety.
Yeah, it does. It's just, whatever you had before, it's now, you know, way up. So
awesome. Well, I'm going to go listen to some more birds and go visit Miss Peabody. She's the peacock here who lets us pet her and feed her and follows us around. So
that's cool. I am going to curl up and watch a movie. That's what I'm going to do. So great. You know what? Both fun, but different. So, let's get to our interview, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Hello, and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Justin Taberham on the show. He's the director of Taberham Consulting and has a new book, Global Environmental Careers, the Worldwide Green Jobs Resource. Welcome, Justin.
Hi there from very, very cold London.
Hello, hello. Yeah, so you're our first London guest. We have to do a little shout out to England here. So yeah, tell us a little bit about where you are and why you're there.
I'm based in central London, and London in terms of environmental policy, which is my background, this is the biggest place in the UK for policy. So, I mean, while we talk, you might find that I started my career, fieldwork was my first thing, and then I slowly moved towards office management and then policy work. So because London has all the big lobbying companies, I ended up being in London. So I live in central London, pretty close to the West End where all the theatres are in London. So a really good location.
Yeah, I was about to say, that's not too bad at all. So, Laura and I always joke when we have international guests that we now we have a place to stay. So hopefully the interview goes well and you'll let us come hang out.
Well, on the floor.
Yeah, right.
Between all those books that you have back there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you started your career in fisheries. What drew you to it?
It's a complicated one. When I was probably about 8 or 9, my dad took me fishing. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in the countryside, rural England, which was a brilliant childhood. So my grandfather went fishing with my dad. My dad took me fishing, and we used to go fishing in the Norfolk Broads, which is a famous set of lakes. And I really loved the environment. I did conservation work. And at my school, we did this careers talk. And the careers talk said, what are you studying? What do you like doing? What do you want to do? And for me, it said things like, we recommend you be a policeman. We recommend you be a solicitor. We recommend you be an insurance officer. Oh. And I said, well, not really. No, I want to do something in the environment. And at that time, in the mid-'80s, we had things like the Chernobyl accident. We had acid rain, which was a really big problem in Northern Europe. We had all these environmental issues. We had salmon disappeared from the Thames in London. So we had lots of environmental issues. I was really into lobbying. I was really into campaigning. I thought, can I do a degree which is going to be relevant to what I really want to do, what my passion is? And it so happens I found out that, yes, there were these new courses called environmental degrees in the 80s. And this was when environmentalism was hippie territory.
Right.
Nobody studied the environment in the UK in the 80s. It was a really rare thing. And there were two main famous courses in the UK. One was in environmental science, and it was at a unit at a university near my parents' house that did environmental science focusing on meteorology, climate change, which sounded great. So I applied for that one. I also applied for a more practical degree, which was environmental studies at that time, which was field work. It was based on conservation field work, geology, studying glaciology, things like that. And so I had these two offers in place. In the end, I went for the one that was more fieldwork based, because I knew that a university had open placements for jobs, and it guaranteed a job in your third year of your degree. So I thought, how can that be? How can they actually guarantee me a job? So I ended up going to that part of Hertfordshire. So it's called University of Hertfordshire, just north of London, and that's where I did my studies. So that's when I ended up going towards the environment sector rather than being a policeman or an insurance salesman.
Well, yeah, like I said, that's a wild departure, but I'm glad you took that journey because that's pretty awesome. And so you've had this really interesting field career. We love asking about field stories on the show. And you once had a fish rescue at an arms dealer's house near London. Now, I can't believe I'm starting here, but so what is a fish rescue? And then, why on earth were you at an arms dealer's house?
Well, what was funny was that my guaranteed job placement for a year when I was studying was in fisheries management. And the fisheries management team was based in London. And so we had to do anything fish related in the whole of London and around the area. And we got a phone call from this person, kind of a state manager. And he said, the fish are sick. We've got sick fish. So whenever you have somebody saying they're sick fish, you have to go. You have no choice. You have to go and rescue them. Oh, yeah. So things like pollution, hot weather that caused deoxygenation, health problems, disease. You have to go as a team. So we drove to the address and we got to the gate just outside London, this ginormous estate. And the gate had cameras everywhere. And then it had a gatehouse with armed guards, like machine gun kind of armed guards. And in the UK, kind of that's a bit scary.
Oh, yeah.
And so we said, well, we're here to rescue the sick fish. And so the guy on the armed guard said, oh, yeah, we're expecting you. So we drove about a mile down this sort of path, and every tree had a camera on it.
Oh, my
And then
gosh.
every sort of 50 meters or so, there was another armed guard. And so we got to it was getting a bit scary. And so we got to the main house, and the wife of the arms dealer came out and said, yeah, husband's away. Sorry about all the machine guns. Can you rescue our fish? So we had to go to the lake. But basically, the armed guards were there all day because I think they felt they obviously didn't know who we were. They were worried about what we were doing. In the end, it was fine. We rescued the fish and we left. But that's probably the most surreal issue we've had to sort of face, apart from lots of other kind of strange things we've had to deal with. But I mean, I was doing field work for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so after 6 years, I then kind of curved my career in a different direction.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah. And go ahead, Laura.
I'm just trying to think, I think that's a great premise for a heist movie or something.
Well, steal the fish. There was no gold. The house was like a palatial mansion. The arms dealer's house, because obviously there's good profit in arms dealing. But I mean, actually, the guy in the end, he was arrested internationally. The actual arms dealer. Oh, wow! So he wasn't a very nice man. I guess anybody who arms deals isn't going to be very nice. And so in the end, he got arrested. But at the time, he's a really wealthy guy. Worried about the wife was worried about the fish. So we did a good thing. We rescued more fish.
Yeah, I'm having a flashback to a drug dealer movie where someone was taking care of the fish tank, right? And that's how they got in. So someone will have to remind me what that movie is. Someone listening knows what that movie is. So put it in the comments.
I could have picked up some good stuff if I'd have gone into the house.
Yeah, there you go.
So then you mentioned that, you did field work for a couple of years, and then now you've written books and you've done a lot of other work, and especially in management and stuff. So what is that like, transitioning your career from, in the field? How do you build those skills to become more of management leadership position? And did you want to do that? Were you forced into it? That happens to people.
I mean, in the book, I discuss a career curve, and I sort of explain my story in terms of how I curved my career. And the way that I always had a view to where I wanted to go, which was to sort of get better, to be more well-known in the field, to become more of an expert. So in my mind, when I was doing field work, it was, I'm loving doing field work. I could do this forever. But in reality, field work, the pay is really terrible. So even in the countryside of England, the pay was so bad that I couldn't actually afford a sort of mortgage on a cottage in the country. And so I started to have thoughts about, this isn't realistic. And I think that in the environment sector, you've probably got to accept for most roles, the pay is not amazing. But it's for the passion of it. I was really passionate about the sector. I got married to a Londoner, and then I thought, okay, how do I get a more successful career? How do I proceed? So I started to get more expertise in strategy and policy work. So I got some promotions in field work. I became the team leader, then I became the area leader for that area. And I thought, okay, I took on some projects in research in fisheries. In terms of fisheries technology, I did some projects on management plans, strategies, and some legislation. So that was the way that I could carry on doing my field work, but I could make my skills more relevant to different jobs. So that when I was eventually able to move to London, I actually moved to policy and strategy work. So I made a first jump into lobbying. So my first jump was in lobbying, and that was helpful because I was lobbying against the organisation I used to work for. So I kind of had the inside line. I mean, it sounds a bit, there's a saying, gamekeeper turned poacher, or is it poacher turned gamekeeper? Poacher turned gamekeeper.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I became a bit like that. So I moved to London and I started lobbying for 2 years. So I had 2 years of really aggressive lobbying, which is probably the most stressful thing you could ever imagine in terms of lobbying against everyone. And so I did a lot of media work. I did lobbying, trying to make people be more sensitive to environmental issues, trying to get people to protect the water environment, trying to get people to promote the charity's aims. After 2 years of that, it was completely exhausting.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're a full-on lobbyist, it's one of the more stressful roles. So I then moved into pure environmental policy with some other things. So then I moved through my expertise with the media and lobbying into a bigger charity which does environmental professional work.
Right.
And in that role, I then curved my career again towards environmental policy, events, awards, policy writing rather than policy sort of changing. And that job grew and grew. So we were doing really well. After a while, I thought, okay, I'm in my 40s now. So that was when I was in my 40s, getting old. And I thought, okay, I've never worked for myself. I think I'll work for myself. So I set up a consultancy. And that consultancy, I focused on publications. I've always loved books. I've always loved publications. I've always written policy. I've written strategy. I've been in the sort of academic sector. So my new consulting work was in book editing on the academic environmental water management side. And so I moved again. So I kind of curved into publications from the big charity job, which was involving journals, magazines, and books, into an academic book thing. So if you can see my career was curving from kind of field work towards strategy, policy, towards lobbying, towards publications, events, and everything, towards publications and other consulting. So I curved. And so that's led to now when I've written my own book, editing book series. I still consult with government on things like international animal trade and regulation. So I've still kept that expertise and I still do some of that as well, but it's on my own time, which I really love.
Yeah. And it's great to kind of map it out that way, because when you say to someone, well, I was in fisheries and now I publish books, it's almost like, how on earth could you possibly get there? So it's really cool to see that. And I think we're going to touch on a lot of that as we go. But so I want to start with policy in the UK. So what are the drivers for policy and what have you seen over the years?
In terms of UK politics, until we left the EU was the driver of environmental policy for a long period of time. And so you tend to get large chunks of environment-related policy. So a directive comes out, which is a massive chunk. So you get one directive that largely does water management. You get one directive that does issues like sustainability, another directive that has a main strategy looking at air quality. Each of those chunks has people lobbying. So you have the private sector lobbying. So a company like an oil company will hire lobbyists. I would be lobbying in terms of environmental management and protection. And through various working groups, you would end up trying to influence directives. And the directives influence UK policy. And UK policy generally is London-based. Mm-hmm. And so there are working groups within Parliament, there are committees in Parliament. But nowadays, there are lots of these collaborative working groups. So if there's going to be a new policy discussed in the UK, a policy group would be formed. It would have representatives from professional bodies like trade associations. It would have private lobbyists from private companies. It would have civil servants, the government experts. And you would all come together and you would argue it over and you would come up with the new guidance. And eventually, rather than driving each other mad, you'd actually come up with a solution the government would then follow. So right. I don't know whether America is America's probably quite similar in terms of private lobbyists have a say, but trade bodies also have a say, and lobbying charities and NGOs have a say. And so that's the way that policy is kind of worked on practically in the UK.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, similar, and I think that's fair to say. But I guess our pie is how it's split is kind of who has the most money almost. It's also true that the sector is changing fairly rapidly. Yeah, and the biggest growth areas in the global sector is renewables.
But then a large proportion of people who are going to move to renewables already have the skills in the traditional industrial sector. So I think that people mustn't forget that a lot of green jobs are exactly the same jobs as they did in the industrial sector, just changed to green technologies. So that's something that I think is actually really, really important, is that people don't need to think, well, because I'm a tradesman, I can't be a conservation person because I'm a tradesman. Well, if you're a tradesman, your skills can be moved to the renewable sector, or they can move towards different areas. I think people mustn't imagine because they haven't got a PhD, they can't work in conservation, or they don't have a chance of working for a green NGO. That's absolutely nonsense. Yeah. So I think, the sector's changing fairly rapidly, and I think it's maturing slowly as well.
Yeah. Well, it's funny here in the US, what we're seeing in the renewable sector, offshore wind is huge. It's becoming huge, I should say. It's become, year over year, that's growing exponentially compared to other sectors. Is that the same case in the UK?
In the UK, because the Great Britain itself is an island, and the north of the island has a lot of offshore wind. So we're expanding offshore wind really, really rapidly. And it then is linking across to Europe and back to the UK in terms of the power linkages. So we're doing well for offshore wind. We're really bad at onshore wind because of some lobbying and people saying they don't like the noise, which is nonsense. And we're developing more solar, but too slowly. So our focus has become.
Wait, you don't get sun there?
Very occasionally, not London, but very occasionally parts of the UK have sun. So I think that sector in the UK, we're growing wind well, solar not so well, storage not so well, wave power not so well. But I think that people need to understand about their skills can be transferred to the green sector from traditional sectors. That's really important.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I agree. And I think that's really well said. Thank you for that. Yeah. You said, in the 80s, there were really not any leaders for the environment. But I would say now Europe has really become the leader when it comes to environmental regulations and policy and enacting, updating climate change. So can you kind of walk us through where we were and why they're leaders now and how they've been so effective at implementing those changes?
I think Europe was a really good formation of countries to bring forward directives, these really large chunks of legislation. So Europe was successful in bringing together massive numbers of different organizations and managing to form policy and strategy around these big directives. Whereas I'm assuming that in the USA, things are more complex in terms of doing one strategy for one area and one strategy for another area. So it was helped by having these large chunks that were in sectoral areas. In terms of whether we're leaders, in the UK, we've now left Europe.
Right.
There's a big concern in the UK about watering down our environmental regulations. Europe still maintains quite a high standard of regulations. So I think that we've probably been able to lead because of the fact that we have these very big areas of policy that you can focus on, rather than thousands of different things which sort of split your attention. So I think it's that conformity, that set of standards, which means that we've been fairly forward-thinking. But I think the UK government, my concern is that we'll step back now. That's my key concern now that the UK has left Europe.
And has that happened? Have you seen some of those things happen in other areas? I mean, is that where we're trending in the UK?
I think at the moment, we have a government which is right-wing. So I think right-wing governments tend to put business first and the environment much further down the sort of queue.
Right.
I think we're seeing this government approach rather than a long-term approach. So I think that we're seeing our way through what we call Brexit, where we left the European Union. We're seeing our way. We're not sure what's going to happen. We don't know where it's going to go. So we're in a state of flux in the UK in terms of bringing back regulation and things like greener agriculture. We're yet to see how the UK might have a greener agricultural sector outside Europe. So it's a feeling your way, very early stages at the moment in the UK.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And Yeah, hopefully, like I say, maybe we'll be able to check in with you in a year or two, and we'll have a better understanding of how that's going to go. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I might be very sad at that stage. So I might be really sad or
not.
really, really happy.
Yeah.
I know, right? I know.
Let's hope we're really happy. But yeah, speaking of happy, let's move into books. I know that's one of your happy places. And before we jump into your book, I want to touch on the stacks of books behind you and, tell us about your collections and signatures and all that stuff.
I've got a really, really bad problem with collecting books. So basically, I have a home office which is half filled with fishing rods on the ceiling and fish sculptures and fish hangings and fish lures and all sorts of collectible fishing gear. And the rest of the office has piles and piles and piles of books. I can't help collecting books. And I also have a website where I sell books. So some I managed to sell, and that's great. But unfortunately, the proportion that I keep is high compared to the proportion that I sell. So I've got a real book problem, but I need to really focus on moving them on rather than keeping them hidden in my office.
Yeah, I love that. You're kind of like the person who is a foster dog dad and can't get rid of the puppies, and you're like, I can't keep rid of these books.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that as a book collector, you're supposed to say, I'm only going to collect books by one author, or I'm only going to collect books by theme or by area.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't stick to it, to be honest. I keep thinking, well, I'll keep that one. Oh, no, I better. Oh, no, but I'm going to keep that one.
And are they books that you've read, or are they books that you're keeping so that maybe someday you'll read them, or are you just holding on to them?
I generally collect hard copy books that are signed first editions.
Okay.
And so they're less readable. You can't really read a hard copy that easily unless you're really strong. So these are collectible signed first editions.
Nice.
Of which I've probably got a couple of thousand.
Wow.
But I do have favourite subjects. Obviously, environmental books, signed books by David Attenborough, who you probably sort of know in the USA.
Oh, yeah.
I've got quite a collection of those. I've got a lot of environmental books signed. So they're really what I should be collecting, rather than endless books by thriller writers that I shouldn't really be collecting and keeping. So it's a terrible, terrible obsession. But I love books. I've always loved books. From being a kid, I've loved books. So the fact that I've ended up being an environmentalist and I've curved back to being a book fan is really, really pleasing. To end up back in books is brilliant.
Yeah. But let's talk about your book, because you and I have been talking about your book for a couple of years. I know that's how we met, but we connected because I was doing environmental career coaching, still do, and you asked for me to do a little read on your book and also put in some of my best advice after doing career coaching for a couple of years. And I'm just super excited that it's out now. So tell us a little bit about it.
This book first began in Monterey Aquarium in California. And that was in the mid-90s because I found a book by the Environmental Careers Organization. And it was about environmental careers in the USA. So this must be 95, 96, that kind of period. And I suddenly thought the UK has nothing like this. And so it was a seed in my mind that the UK could do with a book on all different sectors and green careers. So from that point on, it was in my mind. And then after that, I thought over the years, well, if I get the opportunity, I'd love to have something on green careers across the world. And only through finishing work full-time in the sector and setting up my own consultancy was I free to actually work on this proposal for a book. So it's been a long time in my mind, but it's probably 2016 when the publisher said, well, great idea. What a brilliant idea, a book about global environmental careers. Because there are lots of books about UK or American careers. There are lots of books about conservation careers or parks careers or climate change careers, which is brilliant for those sectors. I just thought in my mind, could you bring a book together that covers the entire world and most of the environment sector? And I thought, yes, but no. And so what I've done is I've written the book based on what I could do within like 3 or 4 years. So the book is 3 or 4 years work. But I've also set up a website, which is env.careers. So I've set up the env.careers website is a backup for the book. Or if you really don't want to buy the book, because it sounds too awful, you can go to their website. So env.careers is a website that has additional information. And if I've missed sectors because I couldn't slot them in, I'm going to be developing that website to be a resource behind the book as well. And so going back to the book, Wiley, the publisher, said, great idea, get on with it. And that was 2016. I've been really busy. So It's only now that the book has come out, and it's doing really well, which is great. But I mean, the idea is it was aiming to be practical. It was aiming to ask other people their kind of top tips on the environment sector. And if you ask enough people, you get similar ideas about top tips, and people's personal profiles have commonality. One thing that I found is that loads of people, me included, have started a green career in their minds from loving the environment from a young age. So that can be things like conservation work, fishing, walking, countryside holidays, enjoying being in green space. So a lot of people start their green careers from a love of the environment in various ways.
Right. That's fantastic. And I think this is a great resource for people. Let's touch back on something you said about it being the first global book, because I know that I get contacted from people from different countries outside of the US, or people in the US who want to move to other countries, and they want to know, me being from the US, if I can give them advice. So in writing a book about global issues, how did you, because you said, yes, you can, and yes, you couldn't write it well in that way. What do you see are the commonalities? And then what are those few things that maybe I, as a career coach in the US, shouldn't or couldn't touch on that you couldn't put in the book?
There's one obvious challenge to having a truly global environmental career, and that's visas and permissions and permits.
Yep.
If you're fortunate to be able to get approval to work in other countries, there's nothing to stop you trying to get environmental jobs in other countries. Part of my idea about this book was to help people understand that getting a green career in Africa has similar challenges to getting a green career in the UK. So things like, how do I get a job without experience? How do I get experience without a job? And things like, should I try and be a specialist, or should I try and be a generalist? Yeah. So these commonalities go across the entire global environment sector. So outside the challenges of being allowed to work internationally, there are commonalities across the world in terms of the challenges of getting a green career. Now, there are also very similar issues. Fisheries management, for example, is very similar around the world. And I have lots of friends who some moved to Oregon. I have friends who moved to New Zealand doing fisheries roles. The technology and techniques are really similar. The only difference is certifications. So some careers have certifications that you would need to do when you got in country. So there's absolutely nothing to stop you having global perspective on your career. But it's really good for you as a green person to learn about other countries and what their challenges are. And also, what careers are like in those countries as well.
So, yeah, I love that perspective. That global perspective is really neat, really interesting. And reading through your bio and, your notes on the book, we both seem to like a good generalist specialist discussion, right? So I'm sure there's room for both approaches when you want to work globally. But do you have like a list of advice that you would give to both groups, or maybe just a list of best tips in general for people looking to do it?
Well, in the book, I had top tips and personal profiles from 60, 70 different environmental professionals across different sectors, across different countries. And there were some top tips that kept coming up all the time. And so my toppest of all top tips is probably something about stickability. Do you have the word stickability in the USA?
We do now.
Okay. So stickability is, if you want to get a green career, you're going to need to have stickability, which is the ability to stick at things, not to quit, not to give in, because I have loads of people I know in the sector who it's taken them absolutely years to go from a voluntary position in a wildlife trust or on a reserve to actually developing a proper paid green career. One of my biggest friends, he started work as a volunteer working on squirrel projects in Scotland. He was a volunteer for several years. He ended up doing a part-time position looking after wildcats. So wildcats, so this is not mountain lions. This is basically wildcats, slightly bigger than your domestic cat, but pretty aggressive. Right. So he worked on wildcats, but it took him several years. And he even quit for a while to be a teaching assistant because there was no money coming in.
Right.
He's now managed to get kind of a full-time project officer role working with squirrels again. So stickability, don't quit. If you have the passion for the sector, try your best not to quit outside the bounds of reality and paying bills. So I think the biggest thing that's come up is stickability. So that's probably the toppest of all top tips. I have others. Do you want to hear my other toppest of all top tips from the entire book?
Yeah.
Okay. Networking and profile raising is really, really top of all the top tips as well. Things like you should immerse yourself in the sector. And I always like the idea, immerse yourself in the sector. And that doesn't only mean, for example, in conservation or parks management or climate change. Immersing yourself in the sector means go cross-sectoral, find out about the different websites, the different newsletters, the different podcasts, the different people, the different organizations. Try and join some organizations. There are chapters of all the organizations that we all know. Go along to try the chapter of your local organization that works in the green sector. Immersing yourself, and also keeping an open mind. So you immerse yourself, but keep an open mind to what might crop up. And that links to networking and profile raising. So you need to kind of get to know people, and people need to get to know you. So that's another kind of toppest of all the top tips.
Yeah.
The next thing is mentoring. So if you can, find a mentor and later on be a mentor, or find a career coach. So if you can't find a mentor in your early career, find somebody who may be able to help you. So that may be a career coach. So this means find somebody who's gone through that journey and get to know them, ask them for advice. So now that I'm really old and I've been in the sector for 30 years, I mentor a group of people. So I mentor a group of people and they come to me and they say, can you give us some advice? And I also go from chatting about their challenges through to jobs I've heard about that they've not heard about, through to even suggesting them to companies. So I'll say, well, come on, this senior ecologist at this company, you really should talk to this person. They're really, really passionate about the sector. And that linkage is really helpful. So mentoring, being mentored or being coached is another top tip. Would you like another top tip?
Yeah, hit us with
another top tip is carry on learning.
Yeah.
So don't ever think because you're getting on in the sector, you're a bit tired of learning now. You're a bit tired of going to those organization meetings because you're a bit tired of it. So carry on learning. Obviously, CPD is a big thing in the UK. So continuing professional development, CPD. Mm-hmm. It's things like also think about those softer skills like applying. So if you're very young in your career or you're at uni, think about interview skills, applications, get some advice. There are lots of different people with advice on how to do applications and also interview skills. A lot of unis help you with interview skills. A lot of people help with interview skills. A lot of coaches help with interview skills. So I think that this carry on learning thing, you've got to carry on learning all the way through your career from young to old. That's really, really important. Yeah. One problem that I have in my top tips is the whole get experience somehow.
Yeah.
And this comes up really, really well in Africa, where people find it really hard to get work experience, even volunteer experience, because nowadays people are actually paying for work experience, let alone doing free volunteering. Mm. So I think getting experience somehow, even through volunteering, even through a part-time role, even through when you're really young, like I did, which is conservation volunteering, chopping down, non-native trees and things like that. I think that volunteering is really important. to help you get experience and also to make friends and to get to know people. So that's a challenge, but that's another kind of top tip. Would you like my last topper's top tip?
Yeah,
which loads of people have said.
Yeah.
Another topper's top tip is you don't have to be in a green organization to do good green stuff. I mean, the word green here is horrible, the word green, but we'll use the word green. So if you're a lawyer, you could be an environmental lawyer. I've got a whole chapter on environmental law in the book. You could be an environmental lawyer, or you could work for a company where you have a passion for the environment and you want the company to be more green. Or you might say, well, actually, in my spare time, I want to volunteer. So you don't have to work for an organisation like the Environment Agency in the UK, or you don't have to work for Greenpeace to do good green things. And I think that's really, really important, because people who can't develop what they wanted as a green career can do really brilliant green things through their life anyway. And so these pearls of excitement and wisdom on my topper's top tips are nothing to do with me. They're all the people who've helped with the book. So these aren't things that I've only learned. But it was funny when I asked all these people from different sectors around the world, these commonalities that kept coming up all the way through their top tips and personal profiles. And that's what made the book so fascinating to actually bring together, even though it took me 5 years. It was really interesting to bring everybody together.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It really is. Thank you for that. That's great. That's absolutely great.
All right. Well, I love all those tips, and I think it is so cool. I always tell people that it doesn't matter really what industry, whether it's green or finance or whatever, the career coaching part, 90% of it is the same. It's the 5 to 10% is different depending on what specific industry or niche you're trying to get into. So great tips there, Justin. Appreciate that.
We didn't talk much about generalist versus specialist. Well, should I give you 20? Should I give you 20 seconds on that? Or
give us 20 seconds on generalist versus specialist.
Well, when I started my career, I wanted to work in fisheries, and I wanted to only work in fisheries, and I was going to work in fisheries as a fisheries specialist for my entire career until I retired. When I got into fisheries, I suddenly started to look a bit more at strategy, at fisheries management plans, at European policy in fisheries. So my mind suddenly started thinking, well, there's more to fisheries management than field work. There's also fisheries technology. So I started then to think, well, maybe I don't want to only be a fisheries field worker. Maybe I should think about strategy. So I then curved towards fisheries strategy and fisheries management plans and fisheries legislation and technology. So I started then to think, well, the next jump into my career might be management, because I got a couple of promotions. So I started to do some more management, which was less field work. And then I suddenly thought, I'd like to do more environmental policy. I really like that. So my next job was environmental policy. So then I was suddenly becoming more of a generalist. So my environmental policy role was lobbying, publications, events, awards, profile raising, parliamentary work, legislation work. And so suddenly I'd become a generalist. So I don't think that I made a decision straight away to be a generalist. I wanted to be a specialist, but I became this generalist. So I think that people get really uptight about, should I be a specialist and only focus on being a pure ecologist?
Right.
But actually, the skills that you have in being a field ecologist can transfer across to different areas, and you can suddenly become a generalist.
Yeah.
Probably not sudden, but you can migrate towards being more of a generalist. And the more that you do generalist work, you become known in different areas. Whereas some people are the world's expert on carnivorous fish, or they are the world's expert on marine species or environmental law. So some people stay as specialists, become known as specialists. Others stay as a generalist.
Yeah, and it's really well said. I think that's very fair. I like the discussion, but I also like the fact that, you were one and became another. Your career is not, set in stone. You are the arbiter for what you want to be. And, you might not even see that right away. Like you said, when you started, that generalist idea wasn't even in your head. So really cool to see that change.
Yeah, you sort of become the accidental generalist. But that's okay.
Exactly.
Oh man, that's the name of my book. Okay, no one take that. That's what.
There's a saying in the UK which is "Jack of all trades, master of none." Do you have that in the US?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So Jack of all trades, master of none. So that's really annoying.
Yeah, we do
good at lots of things.
Yeah. Because it has that negative. I think, you know what? I think it's exactly that quote that puts the negative connotation on someone who's good at lots of things. That quote needs to go.
Yeah. Well, not that I'm saying I'm good at lots of stuff, but I did lots of stuff.
Yeah. Well, you did. You picked up lots of different skills, and it doesn't mean that you're not good at any one of those things just because you do a lot of things.
Right.
And then finally, because we're running out of time here, what do you see as this took 5 years to write? Are you writing the next one? Are we already in a new phase? What's the future of Green Careers?
I think that what I want to do is I want to get the env.careers website developed so that people who don't have access to the book can go to a website that's helpful to them. Yeah. In terms of my career, because I'm getting on now, maybe it's time for me to sort of mentor and to take things more easy, take up fishing again. Which is something I've not done. I worked in fisheries, but I basically quit fishing after I worked in fisheries. So my kids like fishing. So I actually think that I'm probably likely to do more book editing rather than writing, I think, in the future, and have a quieter life, which everybody says, and then they lie. Because they end up doing more.
Exactly.
But I think I want to carry on mentoring a group of young people, and for that to carry on. That's my aim.
Absolutely great. And, like I say, to that end, how can people best get in touch with you?
There's on my website, which is justintaberham.com. If you look at the name, my complicated name on the title of this podcast, you can see the name. You can put my name into a Google search, and I have a website for my consulting arm, and I have the env.careers website has a get in touch. So you can easily email me or get in touch that way. I'm really happy for people to link up on LinkedIn. So I use LinkedIn. I use other networks to network. So I'm really happy for people to send me any questions, to make friends, or email me.
Oh, perfect. And so we're out of time here, but is there anything else you want us to talk about before we let you go?
Not really. I just think that I've had a really, really great green career. And I think it's really easy to say, everybody do it. But I totally appreciate there are challenges in getting a green career developed. So I just hope that everybody sort of works out their career aspirations, whether they're in a green job or not in a green job. Keep sticking at it.
Absolutely great advice. Thank you so much for being here. It was our pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks it was great to catch up again.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura.
That's our show. Thank you, Justin, so much for joining us today. A lot of really great advice, a lot of really good tips for those looking for international careers or just careers in general. So it was really fun.
So good. Really... he knows so much about all of that stuff and has had a great career himself.
Yeah. And we say this whenever we have guests on that you can reach out to them, and you should. Please do. He's a great resource. So we're giving you guys resources. We want you to use them. He's a great one. Thank you again.
Yeah. Wasn't that like number 2 advice?
Yeah, networking. It really was. Yeah. Networking, right? We've talked about what that means. So yeah, as always, be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.
Bye.